today, as part of that, I'm honored to be up here with three fantastic CEOs. It's my absolute honor to talk about longevity startups versus conventional biotech startups. There are challenges that longevity startups have when pitching investors and understanding the narratives that the investors are even looking for, right? And then the investors have the LPs that are very concerned about what kind of associations and alignments that there are. And so we're going to learn today about the experiences that these CEOs have had, how they've changed their decks and their narratives according to the audiences that are receiving the information and the drivers that each one of those parties are expecting. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce all the way on one end, we have Dr. Matthew Oakey O'Connor. He is the CEO of Cyclarity Therapeutics. This gentleman was awarded his master's degree at Northwestern Medical in 1999 for his work studying behavioral neuroscience in aged rodents. In 2005, at Baylor College of Medicine, he received a PhD in biochemistry for his work on proteins that regulate human telomeres, and his postdoctoral research includes work at UC Berkeley on muscle stem cells and aging. He was a researcher and administrator at the SENS Research Foundation from 2010 to 2019, at which point he spun Cyclarity Therapeutics out to develop a drug targeting small toxic biomolecules that accumulate with age. Cyclarity is located at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. Next up, we have, actually you've met this gentleman before. Again, we have Scotch Mcclure. He is the CEO of Maxwell Biosciences, and he's an inventive leader who has not only founded multiple groundbreaking companies, but has also co-invented transformative technologies such as tissue-safe antiviral coatings, gene expression modulation, and facial recognition-driven commerce. So, his notable achievements also extend to the world's first dual-core laptop, a pioneering collaboration with Advanced Micro Devices. Thank you for joining us again. And last but not least, very excited to introduce someone new to the stage because these gentlemen have also been on the other stages before. We have Robert Mansukhani.
Robin, yeah.
So sorry, that is fatigue. Robin Mansukhani, CEO and co-founder of Deciduous Therapeutics, which is a venture-backed startup developing novel immunotherapies to treat age-related diseases. He has been an advisor to early-stage biotechs, particularly in the aging and CNS space, including Therini Bio and Reservoir Neurosciences. Previously, Robin co-founded and served as president and CEO of Alzeca Biosciences, a diagnostic imaging company for CNS disorders, which is currently in clinical trials and supported by venture investors. Also, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation and an NIH Direct to Phase 2 grant. Robin has been an invited keynote speaker both domestically and abroad, including at TEDx. Previously, he worked in early-stage venture capital at the Maple Fund and investment banking at Axiom Capital. There's more. He also co-founded Blue Stamp Engineering, an intensive project-based engineering program for high school students, which is incredible. Robin previously served a term in AmeriCorp, where he led health and literacy programs, and he holds a BS in biochemistry from Case Western Reserve University. It is an honor to have everyone here. We're going to be talking about how to gain valuable insights from companies that are straddling this line between being traditional and a longevity biotech startup. How do they navigate challenges and opportunities, regulatory intricacies, strategic messaging for diverse stakeholders, and more. So one of the first questions is more about maximizing clinical insights. This is directed to anyone who wants to answer. How can we be more proactive about gathering exploratory data in clinical trials, going beyond primary endpoints to include factors like frailty and biomarkers?
It's a good question. All right. So the way we think about it is, so just to lay the groundwork, I think in the aging field, typically a lot of the good news is a lot of the mechanisms have pleiotropic effects. So for example, some groups are working on telomere shortening, we're working on senescence. This can impact not just one indication, but tens of indications. And so the question becomes is how do you maximize that potential value prop in a clinical study that can be quite narrow? So you're a little bit juxtaposed, right? You have many possibilities for endpoints versus maybe a single clinical indication. And so a couple ways to think about it. One is, there's a old, not old, but there's kind of in the oncology field, sometimes there's a common oncology target and they'll do a basket study. And so they'll go, okay, in this specific target, there are 3 different kinds of cancers where this might apply to, so we're going to enroll patients in each cohort from 3 different kinds of cancers with this one target and look at them across different indications. Our belief is that actually can be done in aging and longevity too, where, for example, in senescence, we know plays a role in diabetes, plays a role in pulmonary fibrosis, plays a role in kidney disease, heart disease, and other places. And so our view is actually you can kind of loop together a couple of different trials in parallel with a single therapeutic target or therapeutic molecule and look at different indications in parallel and actually maximize value. It also hedges risk, right? So you don't need it to work in everything. You need to work in a few things that are really meaningful and impactful and better than what's out there right now. So I actually think we can borrow from the cancer playbook for aging and longevity.
I would say also FDA indication selection would be something that you want to think about right up front. So you want to go with an indication that's highly comorbid with many of the signs of aging so that you can do the exploratory work, and then you need to design the clinical study so that the FDA will allow you to collect that information. And the way you do that is you say, hey, these are comorbidities that could be seen as symptoms of this, or even better, if they're actually symptoms of the indication. So reason why we selected chronic sinusitis to go to the FDA with is because you get a lot of brain infection with chronic sinusitis, so viral, fungal, and bacterial brain infections and inflammation that has almost identical symptoms to Alzheimer's at a progressed state. So even where you don't have a deadly sinus infection, we've all had chronic cognitive impairment from sinusitis, right? We've all had, we're grumpy, personality change, depression, anxiety, like all of these things, right? You're just not feeling good. You've got some brain fog. So those are all happen to be symptoms of aging, right? And so being able to go to the FDA and say, hey, we want to track all of these things is really good. One, because you're showing, hey, you may have some effects on aging, but also because each one of those indications, after you get a certain number of uses of the drug, and if you're staying up to date with your patients, like you're using a smart device or you're using some way to communicate with the doctors, which is very complex, then you can be collecting information about those symptoms and then go back to the FDA and say, we want to put that on our label, right? That could add hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to your revenue.
Makes sense. Oki, do you have any insight?
It's hard to add anything to those comments.
All right, so we'll go to the next one. Yeah, it's pretty thorough. Just wanted to check. Thank you for answering that. Another question here is about the IND path. How do IND enabling paths align with the unique goals of longevity biotech? Can you share strategies for both navigating regulatory pathways and establishing successful startups in the field? And maybe we'll come back the other way.
I'm going to give somebody else a chance. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. It's not really. I like to think that you shouldn't, just because you're doing something new and we're trying to say cure aging, right? It doesn't mean you have to reinvent every single thing. You don't have to reinvent accounting. And you don't have to reinvent the IND enabling process, right? There's a well-trodden path there for you to follow, and you need to learn it and follow it, and realize that when you get to the end of it and you've tested safety and you've tested the pharmacokinetics, and then you're going to be allowed to go in clinical trials. And other than that, you have to convince investors to pay for it all. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel on everything. And then, like these guys are just saying, the world is going to be open to you when you've got a drug that targets, or a treatment that targets one of the fundamental aspects of aging. It's just a matter of making your best guess of one or two indications to start with, and diving into clinic for something, and then you can pivot later if one of your secondary outcomes or tertiary outcomes is working better than your primary.
Next question. You good? Okay.
No, simple comment. So actually, IND-enabling studies, remember, they're typically done in healthy animals, right? So healthy rats and then large animals, not even primates or dogs. So I think what it gives the longevity field then is when you look at your healthy populations, longer term for longevity, I think the ultimate win is in preventative care, right? Not just sick care, right? So I think what the the dosing in healthy animals actually gives you an insight into what it might be to now dose this in a healthy human one day, because the behavior of drugs can be very different, in healthy versus sick, both in animals and in humans. So I think actually that's what it gives you is long term is in single dose ascending dose studies and multiple ascending dose studies, that's going to replicate your human clinical 1A study, but that could actually be used as kind of a preventative type of trial in the longer term, not immediately in the disease indication, but eventually in the longer term.
I was seeing some nods in the audience on that one. The next question is regarding strategic indication selection and alignment. How do you strategically choose indications in collaboration with the FDA to ensure regulatory success in longevity biotech startups? How do you ensure that alignment with regulatory expectations and clinical trial designs to maximize success in the drug development process?
That is one of the most complex things that any of us have done,
So
I'm
sorry.
sure. It took us a year. It took us hundreds of thousands of dollars of consultants,
Wow.
months and months and months of dedicated effort, multiple Airtables. It was pretty insane because what you're looking for is, ROI for the investors, right? So you want a big indication that you can recruit for, right? So you want some sort of selection biomarker of saying like, this person definitely has the thing that we're going to treat, right? As opposed to they have symptoms that are similar to it, but it turns out they actually didn't, and it caused all this confusion, right? So you want a selection biomarker, you want it to be really big, you want it to be a completely unmet medical need so that you don't have to go into a comparison against whatever is out there right now, and you have a chance to get a breakthrough therapy or something like that. You want to have a clinical trial that's not going to be years or decades long. You don't want to have a clinical trial that's going to cost you billions of dollars, right? So you want to have a clinical trial that optimally would be weeks long. So and then there's many other aspects to this of duress, like how horrible is the indication? Like, is it acutely horrible? Like, are they going to lose a sense, or are they going to die, or something like that? Then the FDA really prioritizes it. So, put all those things together and weight them, and then have multiple molecules that do lots of different things, and compare all of that together, and you get a lot of arguments.
A quick tangential question, then I want to finish these answers. You said, you ideally want a clinical trial that's 4 weeks for people in the room, but probably more online. Maybe for an infectious disease, but for aging, what's the timeline?
Well, it depends what kind of. I think you could put anti-aging treatments or drugs into two boxes. You could have one that is metabolically affecting, in which case you're going to be chronically dosing for a long time or forever, right? Let's say you have a calorie restriction mimetic, you might, intend to take that forever. That's a very different clinical trial from a rejuvenative or a repair type treatment, which could be 4 weeks long. So our clinical trial is designed to last 4 weeks per patient, and then a lot of observation afterwards and follow-up, but the treatment section is going to be really short. And I think you'll see the same thing with senolytics and a lot of other types of treatments.
Yeah, this is a good point, and I think sometimes when you hear a couple of weeks, it's like, whoa, that's crazy, right? But actually, if you just follow the science, in some indications with some approaches that it may be possible. I don't know if a couple of weeks is possible, but if maybe you guys do that, that'd be great. So, but for us in senescence, we have a single dose effect where we can reboot the immune system that has a distal effect on disease for several months at a time. So we see a single dose will give you efficacy in about 10 days, and you can follow it out for a few months. I don't know if we'd get to a month, but you could follow it for at least 3 months from a single dose. So the fun thing about aging and some of these new targets we're going after is that the effect size can be so significant so quickly. It's a little bit different than some of the symptom modifying approaches in traditional drug development. That's why I think it's nice to go after these more disease modifying approaches. But the impact actually from the right target given with the right molecule can actually be massively impactful very quickly. But it's not what people are used to hearing. So sometimes when you tell it to investors, it almost feels like they just haven't seen that before. So you have to actually educate them as to why that can be reality. And your preclinical data should reflect that, quite strongly.
I think this could be one of the elements of a true anti-aging longevity company, right? Is that you are not blocking a receptor you're not causing some sort of disruption in the natural biological process. What you're doing is you're actually going in and fundamentally healing something that was broken, right? And so when you heal something that's broken, optimally, it's fully healed, and you can back away and go, it's healed, and now you've got, a functioning biological system, whereas before, there was something wrong, and that was causing an aging process, right? And so that's why I think, each one of us up here, just not coincidentally, all has a couple weeks long trial, because you're going in and actually healing something that was broken, and then you see long-term effects from that without continuing to take the drug. And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why these types of companies are extremely disruptive to the traditional big pharma model, because it's actually you're actually healing something as opposed to designing in an annuity structure, right?
Sorry.
Before I continue, does everyone know what each one of these organizations is focused on? Do we want a quick refresher? Yes? Okay. Like 2 sentences, what's the indication or what's the focus?
Sure. Cyclarity Therapeutics, we're targeting toxic oxidized cholesterol that accumulates with age in various cells and tissues, and we're targeting cardiovascular disease first.
Maxwell Biosciences, we're broad spectrum anti-infectives. We're going after chronic sinusitis to start with. About 30% of the molecules that leave the nozzle of the smart device spray go up into the brain, and hopefully we'll take out herpes and a bunch of other nasty things. About 70% of people have a herpes brain infection, HSV1. It's very common.
So Deciduous Therapeutics, we are basically, our claim to fame is we figured out how the immune system can regulate senescent cells systemically, and so the in vivo data we have shows that a single dose of our small molecule can restore natural killer T cell function, and that impacts, basically resolves pulmonary fibrosis, metabolic disease, and now we're looking at the muscle and the brain to look at the impacts there as well.
If you do have follow-up questions about what any of that is, everyone is available here. We can give out contact information, but please continue on the answer that you were going to give previously. Yeah, remember?
I lost my train of thought.
It was regarding strategic indication selection and alignment.
Scotch was talking about how it's a short trial because you heal something in a simple way.
Right.
Basically, like, cures don't make money, so that's why it's hard to
Oh, yeah. I remember where I was. I just wanted to give one example. So what he was talking about, the disruption is a real thing, and people don't always like that. As you can imagine, so we're in the IPF space. That's one of our indications, and the current drugs don't work very well, but the payers put up $100,000 per year per patient for drugs that are pretty bad, pretty toxic. You take anywhere from 3 to 6 pills a day right now. So that's the standard of care right now. So they do very little. Our approach suggests a single dose every quarter could be much better than that. And so the cost differential is massive. But people look at it, and it's somewhat threatening, I think, to those companies or the people that are used to that approach. To like, you got to be taking 3 pills a day. This is how it has to be. And we come along and say, hey, actually it could be very different. And we could systemically find a way to restore immune function in the lungs, which will actually then treat a main driver of disease. But you only have to do it very infrequently, as he was talking about. Is it doesn't happen when you're fixing something. You don't need to fix it over and over again. You fix it once, and you may have to come back and maintain it, but the distal coverage on a single dose is pretty powerful. So that's this kind of disruption of longevity that when you talk about it, people can't always wrap their heads around it because it's so unusual versus what the standard of care is right now.
Yeah, so one other aspect here is comparing us to, a standard cure for like blindness or something like that, where there's not a lot of people that have it. You've got a gene therapy, you cured their blindness, and then you become, pharma boy for charging $1 million for restoring sight, right? And then, you're in the New York Times and everybody is egging your house, right? That's not what we're doing, right? So what we're able to do is everybody needs it, right? That's why we're all here, right? It's longevity. And so somebody said cures don't make money. That's big pharma thinking for, there's going to be some disease that some people have or whatever. What we're thinking is we can afford to do this, and our investors agree because everybody has what we're treating, right? Remember what I said, 70% of, HSV, like these guys are talking about like 100% of the population pretty much needs this, right? So it's like, we're talking about like vaccine level commercialization potential. We're talking about like billionaire maybe, like really big. So that's why we're all here. The potential is massive.
So, quick question about that. When you first went to investors, and let's say they're traditional biotech investors or they're longevity investors, and you pitched the idea, how did the traditional biotech react based on the reality that you just explained? And how do you guys navigate those discussions to actually get the investment and get people to understand and wrap their heads around, as Robin was explaining?
Yeah, so what we find is that the older the person is that we're talking to in the pharmaceutical company, like, so the grayer the hair, the more they say, what, like, so this is a cure, this isn't gonna work. The younger the person is, they're going like, holy crap, you guys are gonna make a ton of money, right? And so they're not already like brainwashed by the multiple pill, like multiple ascending dose or whatever. They're thinking like, okay, size of the population, this is what you're doing, this is how much you can charge. Oh my God, they're just doing the math, right? So it's like the quantifiable outcomes are right there in the spreadsheet. All you gotta do is look, right? So that's why our investors are investing. These are all funded companies that are going into clinical trials, either already in or close to it, right? So,
Can you guys tell us about your experiences? And also, you basically said some of these investors are brainwashed as they get older. And another way of framing that theoretically could be that, as I've said on stage several times, there are deeply seated belief systems about what's possible just because of social structures and socially constructed ideas, for that matter. Even the fact that for thousands of years we believe that you're born, you age, you start to suffer, and you die, and that's natural and it's inevitable. And that's because of history. But that's not taking into account, this acceleration and convergence of technologies. And what changes is that which is possible. And so it's amazing that you guys have found investors that have wrapped their head around that concept, because it's quite difficult, especially if you're a really traditional investor from New York City, for example, versus, I'm in Silicon Valley and I want to think outside the box. So what have some of your experiences been, if you can give any kind of case studies or anecdotes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could tell a slightly more pessimistic or story about this, which is that most of our investors are longevity investors and let's say philanthropreneurial. So we've had a hard time telling our story to traditional biotech and pharma investors. The biggest questions they have is the drug target. They haven't heard of, if they haven't heard of it before. If there hasn't been a drug before that does what your drug is trying to do. They're afraid. They're afraid to go forward. If if there's not a clear regulatory path. I literally had a mainstream investor say, "I want a letter." And this is somebody who should know better and must know better, said, I want a letter from the FDA saying they will approve your drug if you achieve everything that you say you're going to achieve in phase 3. And I'm like, now? You want that? You think the FDA is going to write me a letter now before we even started phase 1 saying that if on a hypothetical phase 3 clinical trial that they will approve my drug, and they would never do that. So they're kind of conservative and afraid of untrodden paths, and sometimes it's a bit of an uphill battle, and you have to fight it one at a time and lay out these economic models. The economic models that Scotch and Robin were talking about are really compelling. So that does get them excited, especially the more open-minded ones. But it can be a challenge.
Do you have experience successfully changing someone's mind? And if so, what was the tactic you used? And assuming that that's not going to work, across the board.
Yeah, I think it's our job to essentially change their mind. I think, if you're an investor, and I've been an investor before, so many people are coming to you with all these ideas, and it's like the fire hose every day. So for something to stand out, it really has to stand out. And you have to think from the investor mindset of, if they get excited, they need to be able to defend your deal to their entire partnership. So it's not just about them liking, it's about how can you make them look good and look professional, look like they're getting to a great deal in front of everybody who's going to be new to the deal and probably pessimistic, because that's just kind of, when you say no so many times in a day, that's just kind of where that goes over time, speaking from personal experience. So So I think the data has to be massively, massively interesting. There's got to be a clear story there. I also want to say that it's different pre-seed to seed to Series A. The conversations are so different. When we did our pre-seed, it was like, cool, you guys have an idea around using the immune system for senescence. I could back that. Like, so I was like, okay, $500,000, let's do this and done. Then the seed was like, hey, we got some data that shows that it actually was a good idea. And then some people were like, well, too early. Some people were like, well, that's pretty good data, tool compound, cool, we'll get going and keep running. But I just think the conversation changes. But I think at the end of the day, what plays is typically there's going to be 1 to 2 slides in your deck that's going to have data that is just irrefutable. So it's not about what I say. It's not about me trying to convince you. It's like, hey, look at this data and look at this explanation of how it's going to translate and become the standard of care. And I think you can tell that story with real data that's irrefutable, that's just not up for discussion or for opinions. Then I think the conversation becomes one of like, cool seed stage company like Series A, go to the clinic.
We found that to echo what Robin said, it's all about the data, but it really helps to have a broad spectrum of data depending on the investor that you're talking to. For instance, like there's some investors, we focus on the AI aspect of the company, like how we found the peptide, how we designed the drug, like all of that. There's other investors where they just want to know what the FDA feedback was, and they want to see the FDA paperwork that we submitted to the FDA. Like they're very traditional, pharma investors, and then there's other investors that are like sort of from the crypto community, or they're like just getting into biotech. That doesn't mean they're dumb money. They're highly quant focused, right? They're mathematicians. They are physicists. They really get into the data. And with those guys, like what we found was like you put all your data into a data room, and you just open that data room for them and let them go swim in the data, and they come back going, this is bigger than you thought it was. Like they start pitching us on how like.
So actually, this is a question for you, Scotch. When we first met, you mentioned that it was a struggle because some of the investors didn't believe you. Can you tell us about that? And I think we mentioned this in another talk. What changed? How did that connect with DARPA? And now what's happening? Yeah,
so I think this is also a universal problem with longevity biotechs, is that you go to an investor and they go, so what, you're going to make people younger? Like, no one has ever done that before. Like, I just don't believe you. And it's like, you're on slide 1 of your presentation. You're like, this is going to go well. I'm sure we've all been in that situation, right? So I hope it's not just me. So, but anyway, so what we started with slide deck, slide 1, DARPA funded us for lots of millions of dollars, and that's why this is going to work, right? And so then people go like, oh, okay.
So if DARPA thinks that your wildly innovative idea that's a moonshot, which is theoretically just as wild as saying we're going to make you younger, is okay. So it's an association with an organization.
Yeah, pedigree of investors and pedigree of backers really helps a lot.
I think one of the take-home lessons for me has always been, find 1 or 2 great investors and let them help you funnel everybody else in. So that stamp of approval is really important. One of my own investors, who will remain nameless for this panel and for the future, one said to me, Robin, investors are really lazy. We want to know somebody else loves this, has done the work, has diligenced this, is ready to come in, will price this thing. And then we were so happy to come in after that just to kind of pile on. And we go, yeah, great, that's everybody. So, but I think when you have a couple good investors who know their stuff and can be your evangelists and go, we're going in on this regardless of what anyone else does, it's amazing how the conversation just shifts from like, oh, you're too early and we don't know if it's going to work, to like, oh my God, can we please get in? So the momentum of having a great investor, I think, is probably the seed of making it all go.
So follow up.
Yeah, I was actually, Carl, can someone get Carl a mic? Because I was just looking at you, I was like, due respect, can you come up here and speak? Carl is an investor and also in our Longevity Investor Network on behalf of Lifespan.io, and I think this would be an amazing opportunity to hear from him.
You could paraphrase it.
Well, it's just because I want the people on the screen to hear.
Right, just that you could repeat that. So I just want to, so Oki earlier talked about the
dichotomy between the longevity-focused investors and the more traditional biopharma investors, and the conversation just now was about how investors, want to kind of be lemmings and get behind. You get a little momentum action. So, can any of the three of you or all of you talk about if you've ever seen that across those groups, right? Is that all? Does that only apply within the groups, or how does that apply across the groups?
We see it a lot more on the traditional side, just because there's so many more options to fund on the traditional side, and then there's so much more money on the traditional side. There's barely any money on the longevity side. Like you hear about these big funds like Evolution and others, but I mean, there's only a few. Like, you can very easily exhaust all of your options, all of your large investor options in the longevity space really quickly. So be nice to everybody. Like, if somebody rejects you, be very, very nice to them, because you will likely need to come back to them later, because there's just not that many. If you're just in the longevity space, like very early stage, and you don't know if there's a disease indication that you can actually go after or whatever, you don't have much data. So it's really important to break out of longevity and find something early that you can go after that has a traditional FDA indication, because you just multiplied your chances of getting invested by 100, like much higher. So.
Yeah, and I think some crossover investing, and I think you've been doing this. I don't know if you're doing it intentionally, Carl, which is looking for investors who are not necessarily dyed-in-the-wool longevity investors and networking with them, and then getting those investors to introduce other, like, not necessarily straight longevity investors, and we've had some success with that recently with somebody who's an investor in ours, and made an intro to another investment firm that they were also affiliated with that was a non-longevity investor, and then they made an investment in us. And so working that network of common people who are straddling multiple different fields, I feel like that's going to be a good strategy, and hopefully that's going to keep growing as the longevity investment community grows, as it's grown like tremendously over the last 10 years.
Okay, can I have you give James your mic and you can just share with Scotch? So one thing I also wanted to mention about the whole premise behind the Longevity and DeSci Summit, right? There are lots of longevity conferences. A lot of the same people speak at this, back to back. The reason that we expanded into DeSci was twofold. So one of which, DeSci is kind of the evolution of crowdfunding, which is how Lifespan.io started. Secondarily, DeSci, somewhat, and don't get upset if you're in Web3, because I'm just a newbie. Web3, you can put an equal sign to crypto. Equal sign to blockchain. Blockchain means that you understand or you have crypto. If you have crypto and you're interested in decentralized science, or science at all for that matter, that means that you probably, either have a lot of money that you came into early on in your life. So your life is not the standard trajectory where you go to school, you find a job, you invest in a home, you have kids, you pay for their college. You've come into a ton of money really early, and all of a sudden your priorities shift and you say, well, what can I do with this money? Where do I want to put it? Well, my health. And if they're already interested in decentralized science, why wouldn't they also be interested in longevity? So what we did here was try and converge the fields, and also give the longevity community an opportunity to network with the crypto and DeSci and Web3 and blockchain community, because it's an alternative funding source. Right? I'm getting complaints all the time lately that after the pandemic, VC in the longevity space and probably beyond has dried up, and the VCs can't find LPs, and the startups are looking for, family offices now, which are getting really, really popular. I just got an article in the news today that said family offices are just taking off right now. And they're also looking for private equity firms. A lot of organizations asked me to make sure that these types of organizations were here. Beyond that, if you start meeting people who have crypto, who are interested in health, that's a new funding source. So we wanted to provide the community with access to that. So that's one of the main reasons why this conference is what it is. I want to take a poll. Does the audience want to know more about experiences that these three founders have had talking and engaging with investors, or should we go on to more scientific questions? Hands up for scientific, hands down for investor. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more investor and then get back to scientific. So when you're talking to the investors, let's talk about navigating the investor concerns and regulatory pathways. More of the regulatory pathways, aligning specific indications with broader goals of longevity, vision for the phase 3 pathway, potential challenges and regulatory approval. We kind of discussed some of this, but maybe you can give more specific examples. Conversations that have been had that go in both directions. This was a success, this wasn't. Why? This was a traditional person. I was able to do the DARPA deal.
Yeah, I would say, when you think of clinical studies in two pieces, right? So one, you got to test your healthies in your SAD or MAD studies, then you got to test patients. So I just think getting to the patient population as quickly as possible and getting a real readout is the inflection point for any of these companies. Even traditional biotech, longevity, what doesn't matter. And so I just think there's, in traditional biotech, typically that's phase 2 and beyond. I do think there's a way to thread the needle and do a 1B study in patients that can give you signs of efficacy. Ultimately, it is a safety study. It looks at PK, PD, and any adverse events. But if you do it properly and think about it thoughtfully, I do think you can design good 1B studies without spending too much money. You're going to spend, probably, depending on the indication, anywhere from $10 to $12 million in that entire study. But if you get patient data and you do exploratory endpoints on efficacy in different dosing groups, that can be incredibly powerful. But I think there's a standard feeling to wait until your 2A study or later to do that, because that's traditionally how it's done. But I just think you need to be thoughtful and push the envelope and when can I test patients and what exploratory endpoints can I get there that are actually quantitative and irrefutable and meaningful as quickly as possible.
I'm holding the mic, so do you want it?
I guess sort of a funny story I could tell about phase 3, which is why would we be thinking about phase 3 right now? And I think the answer is that people want to see your vision, that the public wants to see your vision, and especially to Stephanie's point, the investors want to see your vision. Even when I had a conversation with one of our advisors a couple of months ago, who's a world famous cardiologist, and we were talking to him about phase 3, and he sort of shook his head and he's like, your phase 3 design is above your pay grade. You are not going to get to make that decision, and you shouldn't really need to worry about it. But you need to have a story to tell to people, and there needs to be a viable path forward, even if it changes halfway down the line. So that's my...
So getting to the patient early, I think, is really important. So the more painful the indication, the larger the patient population, and the more unmet the medical need is, the louder that patient base is going to be, right? So they will have, I'm sure that they, will have a message board somewhere, or they're going to have a Twitter hashtag, or they're going to have something, because they are outraged that they're watching their family member die, or themselves die, or, whatever, right? So we've connected with the long COVID community, and I don't know if we did the Twitter Spaces thing, right? And as soon as I tweeted the long COVID hashtag, we went from 12 people in the room to 70 people in the room. It was like that, right?
And 150 right after, yeah.
Yeah, because long COVID is often one of the top 10 trending topics on Twitter. And so it just happens that that's a post-viral syndrome that affects the brain. And so this is one of the indications that we're going to be going to with the FDA. And it's completely unmet and completely not understood, except that it's some sort of pathogen in the brain, right? So that's, if you can attach yourself to a movement and then make friends with the leaders of that movement and say, hey, we think that we have something that could really help with this. It really helps provide another source for funding, because there's foundations, there are high net worth individuals that are suffering from that indication, either in their family or themselves. And we've gotten a significant amount of investment from people that are suffering from post-viral syndromes.
So I have one question, but I'm also then going to start passing the mic around. We have a few more minutes. True rejuvenation versus symptomatic treatment. You know, how does the longevity biotech approach of fundamental rejuvenation differ from the standard medical approach of symptom management? How does this distinction impact the development and regulatory pathway of your product? And you can dive into the science a bit more here, and just raise your hand if you have a question. James will come around.
I'm really passionate about this question, which is, I think that this is not just why we have an opportunity to be successful, but as an industry, all of us here in this room, but it's why we're going to take over the pharmaceutical industry. They're coming up against a ceiling that they don't see. You know, let's call it a glass ceiling, and they're running out of options of how to keep ameliorating our symptoms and keep us alive just a little bit longer when we're sick. And the only way that we're going to break through that is by modifying the aspects of aging that are causing all these diseases and disabilities that we're suffering from. So it's inevitable that we're going to have to start taking these new approaches, and that mainstream pharma and biotech is going to start embracing them.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, and I would just point out, when you look at the hallmarks of aging, these tend to be, when you correct them, they tend to be disease modifying. And I think the longevity community doesn't make that and doesn't present that connection nearly enough. I think we are have been beaten up a little bit by biotech, where they're always focusing on symptom modifying drugs, and that's like what people do, and that's what people are used to. We actually look at underlying mechanisms of aging, hallmarks of aging. Typically, if you are successful in treating them, you are going to be disease modifying, not just symptom modifying. And I think if we attach ourselves to those hallmarks of aging, correcting them in saying we are a disease modifying force, I think it'll get a lot of attention, and it deservedly so.
Yep, and the financial models out there from the payers, and we've talked with payers, so both self-insured, like big employers, and then also insurance companies. And if you can target something that is a cash drain for them, right, where they call these, I can't remember what it's called, catastrophic patients. They call them catastrophic patients. So you would think that means that like the person is like really ill and is going to die. That's not what it. They have a catastrophic department. There might be different names in different insurance companies, but I know one of them. They call it the catastrophic cases or catastrophic patients, and these are the patients that are catastrophic financially for the insurance company because they're constantly going to the doctor. Right? They constantly have something wrong with them that costs a lot of money, right? And so like I'm describing old people, I'm describing aged people, right? It's like aged people are catastrophic for insurance companies, right? And so if you can come in, this is why it's inevitable, right? Because of the population blossom that's coming, like a lot of payers are going to go under because there's not enough people underneath to pay for that bulge, right? And so they're looking for, the whole financial model is being turned upside down right now, right? You may even see federal laws passed that encourage the development of therapeutics like what we're developing because they've got to save Medicare, right? Because it's what we were saying before, they're running out of disease pathologies where they can keep you alive just a little bit longer and extend that annuity, and the financial system is breaking at the same time too, where they need to have things that like actually repair the underlying issue so that you're not having to take the medication over and over again for the rest of your life.
Any questions from the audience?
Quick question. You touched on this a few times already, but just on partnerships with pharma or more established biotechs, do you see these fundamentally as a world apart, or do you see a potential to partner with the more traditional industry? And if so, what does that partnership look like?
Yeah, I don't think it's worlds apart. I just think about the mentality, right? So we're coming at them with kind of these novel mechanisms that they haven't thought of or considered before. So, typically I think in most pharma, it's more evolution rather than revolution. And so we're saying we've got a revolution. They're saying, oh, our stakeholders say evolution, right? So I think you have to convince them of that piece first. Two, FOMO, plays and wins. So I think showing them like, hey, it's not just about you, big pharma 1, it's about, big pharma 2, 3, and 4. So one of you is going to do this, but you'd be mindful to be quick. At the same time, when I build a company, especially in longevity, I'm not thinking about dependencies. I don't think about like, oh my God, when can we license or partner with pharma? I'm thinking we need to be prepared to do this by ourselves, and our data will tell the story, and we're not going to put a for sale sign on it, and we're not going to try to actively license it. We're going to get great data, and let people come to us with great data. And if they want to, that's great. If they don't want to, that's fine. But we can do it ourselves.
We have a bit of a different strategy, so I should say we don't have any partners with Big Pharma yet, but we have a plan for it, which is that we assume, and it kind of dovetails on my previous comment about it being above my pay grade to pay for phase 3 or design phase 3, and that's because in cardiovascular disease trials, they assume they're going to be enormous and expensive. I think we're going to be able to reduce that a bit with a drug like ours that'll actually be disease modifying, but that said, we assume that we'll be, and we have a strategy around partnering with Big Pharma, if not sooner, certainly after phase 2, and then essentially handing the keys over to them, at least for paying and running the phase 3 trial through Big Pharma.
So we have actually inked a deal, a partnership deal with a big pharmaceutical company. I can't talk about it, but we're in multiple diligence processes with other big pharma companies. But what we've seen is that those move super slow, and if you're able to go up against a big enough indication that has something to do with national security, like biodefense, or some sort of existential issue in like population demographics or whatever, something where like ARPA-H or DARPA or Department of Defense or somebody is really interested in that, then you can start working with the government. And so then what we found was that once you get the US government to back you, it seems like all you got to do is get on an airplane and go to Dubai or Mumbai or whatever, and you say, hey, the U.S. government is backing this, and they go, oh, you what? Like, oh, we need to do that too, right? And so there's this old adage in startups, like get out of the building, right? Where it's like, I think everybody here has heard that. You don't just stay in your office, you go talk with people. Well, it really helps to get on an airplane, get out of the building, and go talk with other governments. Once you get some support from the NIH or and you can drive a message that says that this is really good for your country to sponsor something, right? So like the Indian government is sponsoring non-human primate studies for us because we were able to say, hey, this is something that's really good for your population, right? So it's like just getting out and letting people know what you've got.
Make sure you have a budget for travel. Next question.
Yeah, I'm interested in understanding or knowing a little bit more about the conversations with traditional investors that you guys have had. Specifically, maybe like how candid they are about whether or not they see the longevity aspect as an asset or a liability. So I see an inherent contradiction in the fact that VCs, I think, oftentimes want to be visionary and pursue something, but they also seem to want to be followers. They want to be a fast second rather than the primary leader, and that's from FOMOs and from looking for social proof from what other VCs are doing. So when you're up there and pitching things to the VCs, when they take things back to their partners and have to justify a case, do you get the sense that they shy away from the story of the longevity aspect of that because they see it as a liability, or is it an asset? Or maybe there's differentiation from one to the next, but yeah, what's the general experience been?
Yeah, from my experience with traditional investors, they typically won't talk about it. I think so. In the way we present the story to them is like, look, this is a longevity mechanism, but specifically it works for these diseases. And so I think when they go back and present, they go, look, the company has this indication figured out and the second indication figured out, but in reality, you really don't get credit for beyond 2 indications. Like, so you've diminishing marginal returns the more POC you have on one single target, right? So you kind of say, look, your lead indication, go great. Second one, credit there. Third, fourth, fifth, it's kind of like, just kind of more of the same. So I think you don't get a lot of credit beyond that. And I think they usually present it as like a real story. that their partners can digest.
We have 3 minutes, and I want one more question. So if we can, answer as fast as you can.
Sure. Have two completely separate decks. Like, don't talk about longevity with traditional investors at all. Like,
You know what?
It's just a total distraction.
Secret, when we were pitching sponsors for this conference, we had 2 separate decks. We had 2 separate websites for the DeSci community and the longevity community. Okay. Another question?
Hi, I'm with NIH SBIR, particularly with National Institute on Aging. You talked a little bit about how kind of some government funding can help de-risk you for other investors, but I'm just curious, what are other ways, or have you thought about other ways that federal agencies can help promote the longevity space? Particularly, NIH is very disease-focused, and so ways of trying to fund the longevity space from federal government that you guys would like to see, or anything like that?
Yeah, how come the NIA doesn't fund aging research? I got an NIA grant, SBIR, for my company, and the only reason was because we shoehorned Alzheimer's disease into it. And you know the history of that. So that would be great. It's not your fault.
Other questions? I saw a hand here. Yes, no, we're good? Yep. This is the last question.
Maybe I missed it in the beginning, but if I understood correctly, so you are going to use your products, your potential drugs for, some age-related disease, but how do you plan then to move, and if you plan at all, to give it to healthy elderly to prevent the aging, or you don't have this in the plans?
So our approach to it is, and I'll talk about this at the upcoming presentation that's in 30 minutes, but aging definitely causes disease, and disease definitely causes aging. You see that in the aging clocks. Dr. Gladyshev from Harvard showed it in his research in the aging clocks. And so we don't want to get into an FDA trial where we're going for 30 years showing that we're reducing aging or anything like this, and they won't even allow it. So but there is a place for some of the biomarkers of aging that those aging clocks show. For instance, in cytokine management, in showing that you're reducing, for instance, either one of these guys could reduce inflammation in the central nervous system as a secondary to what they're working on, because inflammation tends to be systemic, right? And so you might see spontaneous remission for depression, anxiety, like lots of other high dollar items that go along with their compounds. Same with us, right? And so it's a lot of these companies, and you're just looking at kind of the first 3 that are going into clinical trials, but a lot of the longevity companies, you're going to see many different indications that they can potentially go after they get approved for the one that they have determined is their risk mitigated indication, the primary indication that they want to go for.
So we do have healthy age in our plans for 2 reasons. One is to show that the immune system changes as we age. We know that. So showing that it can be safe in aged patients is one, and then 2, because healthy age may be an oxymoron for some patients. So just showing that even in a quote unquote healthy elderly patient, that there's still be positive effects would be interesting for us.
Massive, massive round of applause for these 3 CEOs. Thank you for being here and for sharing all of this. This is critical for everyone who's interested in doing their own startup or supporting a startup. It's a conversation that isn't had often enough, so thank you for having it.